Madam Chairwoman, this is another provision that shows just how out of touch and extreme this legislation is. The vast majority of Americans support voter ID law. I commend Senator Hyde-Smith for this amendment. 75% of Americans support requiring a photo ID for voting. And by the way, that's bipartisan. 60% of Democrats support requiring photo ID to vote. 77% of independents support requiring photo ID to vote. There are 29 states that have enacted that, including the state of Georgia. And this legislation strikes down all 29 of those laws and makes it illegal to require photo ID to vote. By the way, you need a photo ID to drive. You need a photo ID to get on an airplane. You need a photo ID to get married. You need a photo ID if you're young to go to an R-rated movie. You need a photo ID to buy a beer. And you need a photo ID to pick up your tickets at the will call window of a baseball game. And yet the position of Senate Democrats is those 75% of Americans are wrong and no photo ID should be required. And let me point out also that the vast majority of voters have IDs. A 2017 University of Houston study found that, quote, virtually all registered voters in Harris County and CD 23 who did not participate in the November 2016 election possessed one of the state-approved forms of photo ID needed to cast a vote in person. I'm Hispanic. Somehow I managed to figure out how to get a driver's license. And in fact, I think it is a condescending approach of some Democrats to say minorities can't figure out how to get a photo ID. It is striking. The chairwoman said a minute ago that voter fraud is exceptionally rare. That is an ahistorical position. We have seen voter fraud as a persistent aspect of our elections. The state of Texas, going back to LBJ's election in Duval County and the magic box of ballots that showed up at the end, the 1960 presidential election, Cook County and JFK, voter fraud has been a persistent aspect of our history. And what is striking is it is not just Republicans saying this. It is the Carter-Baker Commission. The Carter-Baker Commission, as I said, was chaired by Democratic President Jimmy Carter. Here's what Democratic President Jimmy Carter, here's what the commission he chaired said, quote, "The electoral system cannot inspire public confidence if no safeguards exist to deter or to detect fraud or to confirm the identity of voters. Photo identification cards currently are needed to board a plane, enter federal buildings, and cash a check. Voting is equally important." Jimmy Carter was not being racist when he recommended adopting photo ID to vote. The 29 states, including the people of Georgia, were not being racist when they required photo ID to protect against voter fraud. It is almost as if Senate Democrats looked at the recommendation of Carter-Baker in terms of how to fight voter fraud and inverted them all, reversed them all, and said, how do we get more voter fraud? Let's do more of that. Let's do ballot harvesting. Let's get rid of photo ID. This is contrary to the views of the vast majority of the American people, and it's contrary to any effort to ensure the integrity of elections.
Would the senator from Texas yield for a question?
Certainly.
As a former Supreme Court clerk yourself, am I not correct that the Supreme Court has actually taken this issue up? The U.S. Supreme Court? And what did they say?
So Senator McConnell is correct. The state of Indiana was one of the first states to pass photo ID for voting. That was challenged by a number of plaintiff groups heavily affiliated with Democrats. They brought a challenge saying that it was discriminatory. They brought many of the same arguments Senator Merkley made a minute ago, suggesting that it discriminated against minorities. That case went up to the U.S. Supreme Court. At the time it did, I was the Solicitor General of the state of Texas, and so I led a coalition of states, Texas and a number of other states, defending Indiana's photo ID law. And the Supreme Court, by a vote of 6-3, upheld Indiana's photo ID law. The majority opinion was written by Justice John Paul Stevens, one of the most renowned liberals on the court. Justice Stevens, for a 6-justice majority, wrote an opinion explaining that voter fraud is a real problem, it's a persistent problem, and indeed describing how the data show that photo ID laws, rather than suppress the vote, actually increase turnout and increase the confidence that voters have that their votes will be counted. And I would note that often the victims of unscrupulous ballot harvesting, of theft of votes, are African American or Hispanic low-income voters, and the Supreme Court upheld it as protecting our right to vote, which means what this bill does right now, without Senator Hyde-Smith's amendment, undermines our right to vote because it encourages voter fraud, and no one in this body should be encouraging voter fraud.
Further
Of
question.
course.
It's my recollection, correct me if I'm wrong, that Justice Stephen Breyer, one of the foremost liberals on the current Supreme Court, also voted in the majority. Do you remember?
I'll confess I don't remember how Justice Breyer voted in that case.
Let's get somebody to
I'm
check.
getting a nod from your staff, so I'm assuming the answer is yes, but I can't independently confirm that.